February 1847. They found her husband's grave still fresh. But Catherine Thornhill was already pregnant, and the father, slow, heavy, was not Jonathan. The winter that buried Jonathan Thornhill was the coldest Burke County, Georgia had felt in 20 years. Snow dusted the red clay, wind cut through the live oaks, and the big house at Thornhill Estate stood silent, except for the creak of settling timbers. Catherine Danforth Thornhill, 28 years old, stood beside her husband's grave, wearing black wool and a face no one could read. She had married Jonathan at 19, a careful arrangement by her father, Theodore Danforth, one of Augusta's wealthiest merchants. Jonathan had been 38 then, already twice a widower, with a 5-year-old son from his first marriage. The boy, Richard, had never accepted her. Now Jonathan was gone. Fever took him in 3 days, and Thornhill Estate, 1,700 acres of worn-out cottonland, belonged to her. Or so the will said. The truth was uglier. The plantation was drowning in debt. Jonathan had gambled away most of the cash reserves, sold off 18 enslaved people in the last 3 years just to keep creditors at bay. And the fields were tired, producing barely enough to feed the remaining 34 souls who worked them. Catherine met with the estate lawyer, Ambrose Talbert, the day after the funeral. He laid it out plain. Sell it all, land, people, everything, pay the debts, move back to Augusta under your father's roof, live modestly. That's the only path that keeps you from ruin. Catherine listened, expressionless. Then she asked one question. How long, if I refuse to sell? Talbert sighed. 6 months, maybe 9, before the bank forecloses. You'd lose it all anyway. She thanked him, dismissed him, and walked alone to the edge of the quarters. 34 people lived there, 11 men, 14 women, 9 children. Most had been born on Thornhill. They watched her from doorways, silent, wary. Catherine studied them the way a farmer studies seed stock. Strength, height, clear eyes, straight teeth, no obvious sickness. She made mental notes. That night, alone in the big house, she opened Jonathan's old account books and began to write, not a diary, a plan. She titled the first page, Soft, Deliberate, Cultivation Ledger, Thornhill Estate, 1847. Under it, in her precise hand, she listed the men she had observed. Isaac, 24, broad shoulders, steady temperament. Thomas, 26, tall, good teeth. Samuel, 22, quick, strong back. She drew simple charts, lines connecting names, dates, expected outcomes. She calculated timelines. First generation, 5 to 7 children in the next 3 years. Second generation, 15 to January 20th, 1860. Third generation, self-sustaining workforce by 1875. No more buying people, no more depending on fluctuating markets, no more risk of runaways or sales breaking up families, because the people she created would be hers by blood. She would bear them herself. She was still young, healthy, fertile. She would select the strongest men, conceive deliberately, raise the children in the big house, give them better food, basic education, loyalty drilled into them from birth. They would never know hunger, never know the lash, never know anything but Thornhill, and they would never leave, because Thornhill would be the only home they had ever known, and because, in their veins, would run her blood. She closed the ledger, locked it in her desk, and stared into the fire. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Inside, Catherine Thornhill felt something cold and certain settle in her chest. This was not madness. This was logic. This was survival. And she would do whatever it took. What Catherine began that winter night in 1847 would become one of the most hidden, most horrifying chapters in American history, a breeding program so calculated, so secret, that even the people who lived through it rarely spoke of it aloud. Before we go deeper into the nightmare she built, if this story's already making your skin crawl, hit subscribe right now, This channel uncovers the buried truths, the stories they burned, the records they hid. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Are you near Burke County, Georgia? Does your town have secrets like this? Sleeping under the soil? Let's find out together. Now, let's step back into 1847 and watch the first planting begin. March 1847. The first night Catherine summoned Isaac. The moon was thin, and the quarters were quiet except for the wind moving through the pines. She waited until the overseer had ridden into town, until the last lamp in the main house had been extinguished, until the only sound was the soft creak of floorboards under her bare feet. She wore a plain cotton shift, no corset, no jewelry, nothing that would catch or tear. Isaac arrived at the back door as instructed, head bowed, hands clasped behind him. He was 24, broad across the shoulders, steady in the fields, never whipped, never sold, born on Thornhill. He had no wife, no children, no attachments that would complicate things. Catherine opened the door, stepped aside, said nothing. He entered, eyes on the floor. She closed the door, latched it, turned up the single oil lamp on the kitchen table. The light was low, warm, but it didn't reach the corners. Sit, she said. He sat on the edge of a wooden chair, back straight, hands on his knees. Catherine stood across from him, arms folded. You know why you're here, she said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. His voice was low. Careful. You will not speak of this to anyone, ever. Not in the quarters, not to your kin, not even in prayer. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. If you breathe a word, I will sell you south, Mississippi, Alabama, somewhere the sun burns hotter and the whips fall harder. You will never see Thornhill again. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Catherine studied him for a long moment, searching for defiance, fear, anything that might complicate her plan. She found nothing, only quiet acceptance. Good, she said. Follow me. She led him through the darkened house, up the narrow back stairs, past the closed doors of empty bedrooms, to her own room at the end of the hall. She had prepared it carefully. The bed was made with fresh linens, the window shuttered tight, a small fire burning low in the grate. No candles, only the glow from the hearth. She closed the door, turned the key, faced him. Undress, she said. Isaac hesitated. Just a heartbeat. Then he obeyed. Shirt, trousers, boots, everything folded neatly on the chair. Catherine watched. Clinical, detached. She noted muscle, scars, proportion, satisfied. She slipped out of her shift, let it fall to the floor. She was pale, slender, still young. She crossed to the bed, lay back, looked at him. Come here. He moved to the bed, slow, careful. She guided him, efficient, no tenderness, no words beyond instruction. It was over quickly. Afterward, she rose, wrapped herself in a robe, lit a small lamp. Isaac dressed in silence, eyes down. Catherine spoke without looking at him. You will come again when I summon you. Same time, same door. If you are late or absent, I will know. And you will pay. Yes, ma'am. Leave now. He left. Catherine sat at her desk, opened the ledger, wrote in her precise hand. First planting, rootstock 1, Isaac 24, completed March 17, 1847. Weather clear, no complications. Anticipate harvest December. She closed the book, locked it away, and stared into the dying fire. Outside, the wind rose. Inside, something cold and certain grew stronger. The next night, she summoned Thomas, then Samuel. 2 nights later, she kept meticulous records, dates, weather, any observations about temperament or physical response. She charted cycles, calculated fertile windows, adjusted timing. By April, she was certain. She felt the change in her body, subtle but unmistakable. She wrote, initial cultivation successful, first seedling confirmed. Expected arrival December 1847. She allowed herself one small smile in the mirror, then locked it away again. Richard Thornhill, now 16, noticed the change first. His stepmother stopped writing in the mornings, took meals in her room, dismissed the house servant who usually attended her. She moved slower, held herself differently. He watched her from the upstairs landing one evening, saw her hand rest briefly on her abdomen, saw the faint curve already forming beneath her dress. His father had been dead since February. The math didn't add up. Jonathan had been bedridden all January, feverish, barely conscious. Richard had sat with him night after night. There had been no possibility of conception then, which meant the child had been conceived after Jonathan's death. In March, or early April, with someone else, the realization hit him like cold water. He confronted her that night in the parlor, voice shaking. "You're with child," he said. Catherine looked up from her book. Calm. "I am. Father died in February. He did. Then. How?" Catherine closed the book slowly. "Set it aside. My private affairs are none of your concern, Richard. They are if you plan to pass this child off as his." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, boy. You are speaking to your mother." "You are not my mother." She stood, crossed the room, stopped inches from him. "I am the mistress of this house. I am the owner of this land, and I am carrying the heir to Thornhill Estate. If you ever speak of this again, to anyone, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your short life." Richard stepped back. He saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. Not anger, certainty, cold, absolute certainty. He turned and left the room. That night, he began to watch her more closely. He noticed the late-night visitors, the men from the quarters who slipped in after dark and left before dawn. He noticed how she never looked tired, only focused. He noticed the locked drawer in her desk, the way she guarded it. He began to understand, piece by piece, that what she was doing was not an affair. It was something worse, something deliberate, something monstrous, and he was the only one who knew. But knowing would not save him. April 1847. Richard Thornhill was 16 and already dying. He didn't know it yet, but he felt it. The fatigue came first, bone deep, making his books feel heavy as iron. Then the headaches, sharp, behind the eyes, worse after meals Catherine herself brought to his room. Soup, bread, weak tea, she insisted. "You need your strength," she said, smoothing his blanket, smiling the way a nurse smiles at a child who doesn't understand. But Richard understood. He had read about arsenic in the library, old medical texts hidden on the top shelf. The symptoms matched: stomach pains, muscle weakness, the metallic taste in his mouth after eating. He stopped eating what she brought. He fed the soup to the chamber pot, crumbled the bread for birds outside his window, poured the tea into the flower vase until the petals blackened and fell. He grew thinner, paler, but he stayed alive. Catherine noticed. Her concern turned colder. She summoned Miriam Grayson, the midwife who doubled as physician in these parts. Miriam examined him, pressed his abdomen, listened to his heart, asked questions he answered with half-truths. "Nervous exhaustion," Miriam said. "Common in boys his age, especially after losing a father. Rest, fresh air, tonics." Catherine nodded, thanked her, paid her double. That night, Richard overheard them in the parlor. "He suspects," Miriam said quietly. "He's a boy," Catherine answered. "Boys suspect many things. He'll weaken soon enough." Richard pressed his ear to the floorboards, heart hammering. Miriam hesitated. "If he speaks to anyone." "He won't," Catherine said. "And if he does, I'll handle it." Richard slid away from the door, back to his bed, shaking. He began writing, not in a journal. Catherine would find that. Instead, small scraps of paper, hidden inside the lining of his mattress, under loose floorboards, in the hollow of an old clock on the mantel. He wrote everything he had seen: the late-night visitors, the men from the quarters, the locked drawer, the way Catherine's hand rested on her belly. the faint swell already visible. He wrote dates, names, suspicions. He wrote one sentence over and over. Like a prayer, "She is not my mother. She is a monster." He planned to send the scraps to his grandfather in Augusta, Theodore Danforth, the only person he trusted. But Catherine watched the mail. Every letter, every package, went through her hands first. He needed another way. In late April, he found it. Pearl, a 14-year-old house girl, was the only servant Catherine didn't fully control. Pearl had been kind to Richard since he was small, sneaking him extra biscuits, reading to him when his eyes hurt. She hated Catherine. Quietly, deeply, Richard caught her alone in the pantry one morning. "Pearl," he whispered, voice hoarse, "I need a favor, a dangerous one." She looked at him, saw how thin he'd become, how his hands shook. "What you need, Master Richard." He pressed 3 folded scraps into her palm. "Take these to Westboro. Post them to my grandfather in Augusta. Don't let Mrs. Catherine see. Burn them if you're caught." Pearl looked at the papers, then at him. "She'll kill you if she finds out." "She's already killing me," Richard said. Pearl closed her fingers around the scraps. "I'll do it." She slipped them into her apron pocket, left the pantry, and vanished into the yard. Richard returned to his room, heart pounding, praying she would make it. 2 days passed. No word, no punishment. He began to hope. On the 3rd day, Catherine entered his room carrying a tray. Soup, bread, tea. She set it on the bedside table, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at him. "Pearl is gone," she said calmly. Richard's stomach dropped. "Ran off last night," Catherine continued. "Took nothing, said nothing, just gone." She reached out, brushed hair from his forehead. "I'm sure she'll be found, and when she is, she'll tell me everything." Richard said nothing. Catherine leaned closer. "You look worse today. Perhaps the tonic isn't strong enough." She stood, walked to the dresser, returned with a small brown bottle. "Miriam sent this. Stronger dose. It will help you rest." She poured a generous measure into the tea, stirred it, held the cup to his lips. "Drink." Richard stared at the cup. He saw Pearl's face in his mind, the way she had nodded, the way she had risked everything. He opened his mouth, let her tip the cup. He swallowed. Catherine smiled, satisfied. "Good boy." She left the room. Richard waited until her footsteps faded down the hall, then leaned over the side of the bed, forced 2 fingers down his throat, and vomited the tea into the chamber pot. He lay back, sweating, trembling, but alive. For now, he had one chance left, one final letter, hidden under the floorboard, addressed to his grandfather. If Pearl had been caught, if she had told Catherine, if the letter never reached Augusta, then Richard knew he would not survive the summer. But if it did, if his grandfather read the truth, then Catherine's plan, her legacy, her children, would all be exposed. He closed his eyes, whispered into the dark room, "Please, let it reach him." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the faint sound of dogs barking far off in the woods. Pearl was running, but Catherine's reach was long, and time was short. May 1847. Richard was fading, but he hadn't broken yet. Every day felt heavier, his limbs like lead, his vision blurring at the edges. He barely left his bed now. Only when Catherine was out riding or meeting the overseer in the fields. Those hours were his only window. He had found the locked drawer in her writing desk 3 days earlier, hidden behind a false panel in the bottom left corner. The lock was simple, a brass keyhole no bigger than a coin. Richard had watched Catherine use the key many times, always worn on a thin silver chain around her neck, always tucked inside her bodice when she thought no one was looking. He waited until she left for Westboro on a supply run, then slipped from his bed, legs trembling, and made his way to her study. The room smelled of ink, wax, and something faintly metallic. He knelt beside the desk, fingers numb, and began working the lock with a bent hairpin he'd taken from Pearl's old sewing basket. It took 10 minutes, sweat beading on his forehead. heart pounding so loud he was sure someone would hear it downstairs. Finally, a soft click. The drawer slid open. Inside, 3 leather-bound books, small, the size of prayer books. On the top one, in Catherine's precise hand, the words Cultivation Ledger, Thornhill Estate, 1847. Richard's breath caught. He opened the first page. The handwriting was meticulous, almost beautiful, but the content made his stomach turn. Dates, names, physical descriptions. Rootstock 1, Isaac, 24. Broad shoulders, steady temperament. First planting March 17th, harvest expected December. Rootstock 2, Thomas, 26. Tall, good teeth. Planting March 22, 25, 29. Harvest expected December. Rootstock 3, Samuel, 22. Quick, strong back. Planting April 3, 7. Harvest expected January. There were charts, lines connecting names, notes on desirable traits, strength, height, clear eyes, no sickness. There were calculations, timelines, projections. First generation, 5 to 7 seedlings. Second generation, 15 to January 20th, 1860. Third generation, self-sustaining workforce by 1875. Richard read faster, hands shaking so badly the pages rustled. He found a page titled Special Seedlings, Current Status. Under it, a list. Seedling 1, expected December 1847. Mother, Catherine. Rootstock, Isaac. Seedling 2, expected January 1848. Mother, Catherine. Rootstock, Thomas, and more. Planned, timed, like planting seasons. At the bottom, in smaller script, Richard, obstacle. Monitor closely. If uncooperative, dispose. He stared at the word. Dispose, like livestock, like a sick calf. He copied as much as he could, hands trembling, ink smearing, writing on scraps of paper torn from the back of an old ledger. He wrote names, dates, phrases. He wrote the final note. She plans to breed children with enslaved men, raise them as heirs, create a workforce tied to her by blood. She is poisoning me. Send help. He folded the scraps, tucked them into his shirt, relocked the drawer, and crawled back to bed. When Catherine returned that evening, she brought another tray. Soup, bread, tea. She sat beside him, watched him closely. "You look worse," she said, almost tenderly. Richard forced a weak smile. "The tonic isn't helping." She poured the tea, added the stronger dose from the brown bottle, held the cup to his lips. "Drink." He pretended to sip, let a little dribble down his chin, coughed, turned his head. She wiped his mouth. "Patient. You'll feel better soon," she said. She left the tray, kissed his forehead, and went downstairs. Richard waited until her footsteps faded down the hall, then leaned over the side of the bed, vomited what little he'd swallowed into the chamber pot. He lay back, sweating, shaking, but alive. He had the papers now. All he needed was a way to get them to his grandfather. Pearl was gone, likely caught, likely punished. Or worse, he had no one else. But he had one last idea. The next morning, when Catherine was in the fields with the overseer, he dragged himself to the window, opened it, and dropped the folded scraps into the flower bed below. He watched them flutter down, land among the azaleas, half hidden by leaves. If someone found them, if a house servant, if a child from the quarters, if anyone carried them to Westboro, he collapsed back onto the bed, exhausted. He had done what he could. Now, he could only wait and hope the poison didn't finish him first. Outside, the wind moved through the live oaks, carrying the faint sound of distant thunder. A storm was coming. Richard closed his eyes, whispered into the empty room, "Please, let someone find them." But Catherine was already watching the flower bed from the parlor window, eyes narrow, hand resting on her growing belly. She had seen the scraps fall. She had seen everything. December 1847. The first child came on a night so cold the river froze at the edges. Catherine labored alone in her room. No midwife, no witnesses, only Miriam Grayson waiting in the hallway with towels and hot water. The boy arrived just before dawn. Small, strong-lunged, auburn hair streaked with gold, pale green eyes opening to the lamplight. Catherine held him for only a moment, then handed him to Miriam. "Clean him, wrap him, bring him back in an hour," she wrote in the ledger. Seedling 1, born December 12, 1847, 3:47 a.m. Rootstock, Isaac, healthy male, good color, strong cry. Named Jonathan. She named him after her dead husband. The lie complete. No one in Burke County questioned the timing. Widows gave birth to premature children all the time, especially when the husband had been ill for months. Catherine wore mourning black for another year, played the grieving widow perfectly, and kept the boy close. Jonathan grew fast, quiet, watchful, already showing Catherine's sharp features. By odnatisiacha vosum sot sorok deviat. 2 more children had arrived. A girl, Eleanor, in January 1848. From Thomas, another boy, Samuel, in March 1849. From Samuel, Catherine raised them in the big house, away from the quarters, dressed in fine cotton, fed milk and soft bread, taught letters and numbers by herself. They called her mother, never knowing the truth. They never saw the fields, never felt the lash, never heard the dogs run at night. They were special. Catherine told them so. "You are Thornhill's future," she said, stroking Eleanor's auburn hair. "You belong here. Always." The enslaved people in the quarters saw it differently. They saw the children with Catherine's eyes, Catherine's hair, Catherine's cheekbones. They saw the men summoned to the big house after dark, returning silent, heads down. They saw the pattern. Hope, a woman in her 30s who worked the dairy, was the first to speak it aloud one night in the quarters. "She ain't just bedding them," Hope whispered to a circle of women around a low fire. "She's breeding them. Those children, they're hers by blood." The women stared into the flames. No one argued. They had seen the ledger once, glimpsed through a window when Catherine left it open. Charts, names, dates. They understood. Catherine wasn't just replacing workers. She was building a new kind of chain, one that couldn't be broken by sale or escape, because the people wearing it would be her own flesh. In 1850, she gave birth again. A girl, Abigail, from a man named Elijah, then Margaret, from Thomas again, then William, from Samuel. By 1853, she had 7 children in the big house, ages 6 down to infancy. They slept in a row of small beds in a room she called the nursery, ate at a low table beside her own, learned to read from her hand. They were bright, healthy, obedient. Catherine was proud. She wrote in the ledger, "Generation 1 complete, 7 seedlings thriving, traits stable, green eyes dominant, auburn hair consistent, high cheekbones pronounced, no defects. Proceed to Generation 2. Planning." She began selecting partners for the older children. Jonathan, now 6, would be paired with a girl from the quarters when he reached 15 or 16. Eleanor, 5, with a boy from the fields. Abigail, 4, with another. She drew new charts, lines connecting names, projected births, calculated workforce growth, 50 by 1870, 100 by 1880. A self-sustaining empire, tied to her bloodline, loyal because they knew no other home. Richard watched it all from his sick bed. He was 19 now, barely able to stand. Skin yellowed, hair thinning. The poison had been slow, careful, undetectable. Catherine fed him just enough to keep him alive, weak enough to control. He had never received a reply from his grandfather. The letter never arrived. Pearl had been caught, whipped, sold south. Richard knew it. Catherine told him one evening, casual, while spooning broth into his mouth. She tried to run, with letters. "Foolish girl. She's gone now, somewhere in Alabama. You'll never see her again." Richard stared at the ceiling, tears slipping silently. He had failed. But he still watched. He still listened. He still waited for the moment Catherine slipped. For the day her perfect plan cracked. And it would crack, because even chains made of blood can be broken. In the quarters, the whispers grew louder. Hope spoke to more women, more men. They began to plan, not escape, not yet, but something bigger, something final. They watched the big house, watched the children with Catherine's eyes grow taller, stronger, more aware. They waited, because Catherine had made one fatal mistake. She had created children who could read, children who could think, children who would one day understand exactly what she had done to them. And when they did, they would not forgive. Summer 1858. Jonathan was 11, Eleanor 10, Abigail 9. They were old enough now to notice things. The way Mother measured them against the doorframe every month, noting height, shoulder width. The way her eyes lingered on their faces like she was inspecting livestock. The way she spoke of duty, legacy, Thornhill's future, like verses from a Bible only she could read. The way she never let them play with the children from the quarters. "You are house children," she said. "You are different. You are better." But they were beginning to see. They weren't better. They were the same as her. Same pale green eyes. Same auburn hair streaked gold in sunlight. Same high cheekbones. They didn't look like the portrait of their father in the parlor. The man with the square jaw and dark eyes who died before any of them were born. Jonathan asked once, standing in front of the painting, "Is that really my father?" Catherine smiled, thin and sharp. "Of course it is. Who else would it be?" But Eleanor, always watching, always quiet, had already begun slipping into the study when Mother rode to Westboro. She had learned to pick the desk lock with a hairpin, the same way she'd seen Pearl do it years ago before Pearl disappeared. She opened the ledger. Read the first page. Seedling 1, Jonathan, rootstock Isaac, born December 1847. Seedling 2, Eleanor, rootstock Thomas, born January 1848. Seedling 3, Abigail, rootstock Elijah, born March 1849. She read the charts, lines connecting their names to future pairings, dates, expected births, her name linked to a boy named Marcus, to be born 1862, pairing anticipated 1875. She was 10. 1875 felt like forever away. But the ink on the page was real. It meant something monstrous. She told Jonathan that night, under the covers in the nursery, whispering so Abigail wouldn't wake. "Mother isn't our mother the way we thought." Jonathan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She wrote it. In her book, "Isaac is your father, Thomas is mine. Elijah is Abigail's." Jonathan stared at her, face pale in the moonlight. "That's impossible. It's in her handwriting. She plans to pair us, when we're older, with people from the quarters, to make more children. For the plantation." Jonathan shook his head, slow, disbelieving. "She said we're special. She said we're her legacy." "That's why," Eleanor whispered. "We're her blood. That's the legacy." Jonathan didn't speak for a long time. Then, very quietly, "I don't want to believe it," but he did, because he had seen the way Mother looked at them sometimes, not with warmth, but with calculation, like a farmer eyeing prize stock. Abigail overheard them the next night. She was only 9, but sharp as broken glass. She cried silently into her pillow, then asked the one question that changed everything. "If she's our mother, why does she hate us?" Eleanor had no answer, but the question stayed with them, heavy, poisonous. They began watching Catherine more closely. They noticed the late-night summons, men from the quarters slipping in the back door, leaving before dawn. They noticed Mother's growing belly again. The 4th time, they noticed how she never spoke of love, only duty, only the future of Thornhill. They noticed the locked heritage room, the one they were forbidden to enter. One afternoon, when Catherine rode to Westboro, Eleanor led Jonathan and Abigail down the east wing. The door was locked, but Eleanor had practiced. Click. They slipped inside. The room smelled of oil, ink, old paper, and something faintly sour. Shelves lined the walls, filled with leather books. On the center table, charts, family trees drawn in black ink, lines connecting names. Their names: Jonathan, Eleanor, Abigail, Margaret, William, Henry, Caroline, each connected to future pairings. Dates, projected offspring, vials of hair, labeled with their names, dates of birth. Eleanor opened one ledger. Read aloud in a shaking voice. Generation 1 complete. 7 seedlings thriving. Traits stable. Proceed to Generation 2. Abigail whispered, "What does that mean?" Eleanor closed the book, hands trembling. "It means she wants us to have children with people she chooses, so the plantation will always have workers who belong to her." Jonathan's face twisted. "She's our mother. She's our owner," Eleanor said. They stood in silence, the truth settling like ice in their chests. They left the room, relocked the door, returned to the nursery. That night, they made a pact, whispered under the blankets, voices barely louder than breathing. "We wait," Eleanor said. "We learn, we get stronger. And when the time comes, we stop her." Jonathan nodded slowly. Abigail, tears in her eyes, whispered, "I don't want to be like her." "You won't," Eleanor said. "We won't." But Catherine felt the shift. She felt it in the way they looked at her now, not with trust, but with something colder, something calculating. She tightened her grip. More lessons, more measurements, more talk of duty. She began locking the heritage room with a heavier padlock. She began summoning them to her study, questioning them separately. "Do you love Thornhill? Do you understand your place? Do you know what family means?" They answered yes, every time. But their eyes said something else. And in the quarters, Hope watched the big house children more closely. She saw the way they moved now, careful, watchful. She saw the way they glanced toward the quarters, not with superiority, but with something like recognition. Hope began speaking to them, in small ways. A nod in passing, a quiet word when Catherine wasn't looking. "You're not alone," she whispered to Eleanor one afternoon near the kitchen garden. Eleanor looked at her, green eyes meeting brown. "I know," she said, and for the first time, Hope believed the children might one day stand with them, instead of against them. The storm was building. Catherine felt it. She wrote in the ledger, "Seedlings showing signs of unrest. Increased monitoring required. Discipline must be maintained, but discipline can only go so far when the ones being disciplined begin to understand the cage they're in." And these children were beginning to understand. They were beginning to hate, and hate is patient. Fall 1860. Abraham Lincoln's name was on every tongue in Burke County. Talk of secession, war, freedom drifted into Thornhill Estate like smoke from distant fires. Catherine tried to keep it out. She forbade newspapers in the house, forbade talk of politics at meals, forbade the children from speaking to anyone outside the big house, but whispers still reached them. House servants carried fragments. Field hands carried rumors. Even the wind seemed to carry the word Lincoln, emancipation, free. The children heard. Jonathan, now 13, Eleanor 12, Abigail 11, Margaret 10, the younger ones trailing behind. They were taller now, sharper, more aware. They no longer believed Mother's stories about their special place without question. Eleanor had read more of the ledger, memorized the charts, knew the names of their real fathers, knew the dates Catherine planned to pair them. She told the others, in pieces, carefully. When Mother was riding or meeting the overseer, Jonathan listened, face hard. "I won't do it," he said one night in the nursery. "I won't let her use us like that." Abigail, always the bravest, whispered, "Then we run." Margaret shook her head. "Where?" "We don't know anything outside Thornhill." Eleanor looked at them all. "We don't run yet. We wait. We learn. We talk to the people in the quarters. They know things we don't." They began to move. Small steps. Jonathan started slipping out at night. meeting Hope near the smokehouse, asking questions in whispers. What happens if the war comes here? Hope looked at him, saw Catherine's eyes in his face, but also something else, something angry. If the Yankees win, you're free, all of you, but freedom won't come gentle. And your mother, she'll fight to keep what she thinks she owns. Jonathan nodded slowly. She thinks she owns us. She does. On paper, Hope said. But paper burns. Eleanor began speaking to Ruth, the woman who worked the dairy, the woman who had lost a daughter to one of Catherine's forced pairings years ago. Ruth looked at Eleanor, saw the same green eyes that had watched her child suffer. You look like her, Ruth said. I know, Eleanor answered, but I'm not her. Ruth studied her for a long moment. You might be the only one who can stop her. The younger children, William, Henry, Caroline, were still too small to understand fully, but they felt the shift. They clung to their older siblings, asked fewer questions, obeyed Catherine with careful precision. Catherine sensed it. She felt the coldness growing in the nursery, the way conversations stopped when she entered, the way their eyes followed her now, not with love, but with calculation. She doubled the locks on the heritage room, carried the key herself at all times, slept with the ledger under her pillow. She began summoning the older children to her study, one by one, questioning them. Do you love Thornhill? Do you understand your duty? Do you know what it means to be family? They answered yes, voices steady, eyes empty. But Catherine wasn't fooled. She wrote in the ledger, Generation 1 showing signs of disloyalty, Jonathan and Eleanor most concerning, discipline required, possible sale of problem seedlings to remove influence. She considered selling Jonathan and Eleanor south, breaking the bond, starting over with the younger ones, but she hesitated. They were her blood, her legacy. Selling them would be admitting failure. Instead, she tightened control. She forbade them from leaving the house, even to the garden. She had the windows nailed shut on the second floor. She began dosing their tea with small amounts of laudanum to calm their nerves. She said, the children noticed. They poured it out when she wasn't looking. Pretended drowsiness. Let their speech slur slightly. They played the part. But inside, the pact grew stronger. One night in late October, Eleanor met Hope behind the smokehouse. I want to help, Eleanor said. Hope looked at her, long and hard. You're her daughter. I'm her prisoner, Eleanor answered. And I want out. Hope nodded slowly. Then listen. When the war comes closer, when the Yankees get near, we move, all of us. But we need someone inside the big house, someone who can open doors, steal keys, keep her distracted. Eleanor met her eyes. I can do that. Hope reached out, touched Eleanor's arm. You're brave, girl, braver than she ever was. Eleanor felt something warm in her chest, something like hope. But when she returned to the house, Catherine was waiting in the hallway. Where were you? Fresh air, Mother. I couldn't sleep. Catherine studied her, eyes narrow. You've been strange lately. All of you. Eleanor forced a small smile. We're just growing up. Catherine stepped closer. Growing up means responsibility. It means loyalty. It means understanding that Thornhill is your home, and I am your family. Eleanor nodded. Yes, Mother. Catherine reached out, cupped Eleanor's chin, forced her to look up. If I ever thought you were disloyal, I would do what must be done. Do you understand? Eleanor met her gaze. Steady. I understand. Catherine released her, turned away, but Eleanor saw the tremor in her hand. Catherine was afraid, and fear makes people careless. That night, Eleanor slipped into the study while Catherine slept. She took the ledger, the charts, the vials of hair. She hid them under a loose floorboard in the nursery. She kept one vial, Abigail's hair, and smashed it against the hearth in the heritage room. The glass shattered, hair scattered in the ashes. She left the room, relocked the door, returned to bed. The next morning, Catherine opened the heritage room, saw the broken vial, the empty space on the shelf. She screamed. A raw, broken sound. The children heard it from the nursery. They looked at each other. Eleanor whispered, It started Catherine stormed into the nursery, face white with rage. Who did this? Silence. She grabbed Jonathan by the arm, shook him. Who? Jonathan looked at her. Calm. I don't know, Mother. She turned to Eleanor. You. Eleanor shook her head. Catherine looked at Abigail. Margaret. The younger ones. No one spoke. Catherine released Jonathan, stepped back, breathing hard. You think you can destroy what I built? You think you can erase me? She laughed, bitter, broken. You are mine. You will always be mine. And when the time comes, you will do what I designed you to do. She left the room, slamming the door. The children looked at each other. Jonathan spoke first. Quiet. We don't wait anymore. Eleanor nodded. We act, Abigail whispered. How? Eleanor smiled. Cold. For the first time, like Catherine, we use what she gave us. Our blood, our minds, and her fear. The storm had arrived. And the children were ready to strike the lightning. Catherine had created her own destruction, and it was waking up. Winter 1860. The air in Thornhill Estate turned brittle, like glass about to shatter. Catherine no longer slept soundly. She paced the upstairs hall at night, checking locks, listening at nursery doors, watching shadows. She had begun carrying a small pistol in her skirt pocket, loaded, hammer back. She told the children it was for protection from Yankees, but they knew better. They knew who she feared. Jonathan, now 13, had grown tall enough to look her in the eye without tilting his head. Eleanor, 12, had learned every creak in the floorboards, every blind spot in the house. Abigail, 11, had stopped crying, started planning. They met in the nursery after midnight. When Catherine's pacing finally stopped, whispers only, Eleanor spoke first. She's afraid of us now. Jonathan nodded. She knows, we know. Abigail, voice steady, asked the question they'd all been circling. When do we move? Eleanor looked at them both. Soon. Before she sells us. Before she doses us harder. Before the war reaches us and she decides to burn everything rather than lose it. They had learned from Hope, from Ruth, from the quarters. That war was coming closer. Union troops had taken Savannah. Sherman was marching north. Georgia was bleeding. Freedom was a word on everyone's lips. But Catherine refused to let it touch Thornhill. She had begun talking about relocating, moving the children west, to Alabama, to a new plantation where no one knew their names, where she could start over. The children knew what relocating really meant. It meant cages, new chains, new pairings, the same nightmare under a different sky. They wouldn't let it happen. Jonathan said, quiet, certain. We take the house. Eleanor nodded. We lock her in her room, take the keys, take the ledger, take the pistol. Then we open the doors, let everyone out. Abigail whispered. She'll fight. She's one woman, Jonathan said. We're 7, and the quarters are 40. They planned for 3 nights. Small details. Eleanor would steal the study key again, copy it in wax from a candle. Jonathan would watch Catherine's movements, learn her sleeping patterns. Abigail would talk to the younger children, prepare them to stay quiet, stay calm. They would move on the next full moon, when the light was bright enough to see, but the house was still asleep. The full moon came on December 19, 1860. That night, Catherine paced longer than usual, pistol in hand, muttering to herself about loyalty, legacy, blood. She finally went to bed at 2 a.m. The children waited until 3. Eleanor slipped downstairs, unlocked the study, took the ledger, the charts, the remaining vials of hair. She carried them to the nursery, hid them under Jonathan's mattress. Jonathan went to Catherine's door, listened, steady breathing. He signaled. They moved as one, silent, practiced. Eleanor and Abigail took positions in the hallway, ready to block escape. Jonathan opened Catherine's door. Slow, no creak. She slept on her back, pistol on the nightstand, hand resting near it. Jonathan stepped inside, heart hammering. He reached for the pistol. Catherine's eyes snapped open. She lunged, Grabbed his wrist. Twisted. Jonathan grunted. Pushed back. They struggled. Quiet. Desperate. Furniture scraping softly. Catherine hissed. "You ungrateful little..." Jonathan wrenched free. Grabbed the pistol. Pointed it at her. Catherine froze. For the first time, real fear in her eyes. "Don't," she whispered. "I'm your mother." "You're not," Jonathan said, voice shaking but steady. "You're our owner, and we're done being owned." Eleanor and Abigail rushed in, tied her wrists with strips torn from bed sheets, gagged her with a handkerchief. Catherine fought, eyes wild, but 3 children against one exhausted woman. She couldn't win. They dragged her to the heritage room, locked her inside. She pounded on the door, muffled screams, but the house was big, the walls thick. No one outside would hear. The children stood in the hallway, breathing hard. Jonathan looked at Eleanor. "Now what?" Eleanor said, "Calm. Now we open the doors." They went downstairs, unlocked every exit. The front door, the back, the side. They walked to the quarters, knocked softly on Hope's cabin. Hope opened the door, saw 3 children from the big house standing there, faces pale but determined. Jonathan spoke. "We locked her in the heritage room. We have the ledger. We have the pistol. We're leaving. Tonight. Anyone who wants to come can..." Hope stared at them. Then she smiled. Slow, fierce. "Get everyone," she said. "We're going." Within an hour, the quarters were moving. Men, women, children, packing what little they owned, wrapping feet in rags, lighting torches. 42 people, plus 7 from the big house. 50 total. They walked out of Thornhill Estate under moonlight. No dogs, no whips, no chains. Catherine screamed behind the locked door, but no one came. The group headed north, toward the Savannah River, toward Union lines, toward whatever freedom looked like. Jonathan carried the ledger, Eleanor, the pistol, Abigail the younger one's hands. They didn't look back. Thornhill Estate stood empty under the moon, big house dark, quarters silent, fields still. Catherine Thornhill, alone in her heritage room, surrounded by her charts, her vials, her broken dream, began to understand. She had built a legacy, but legacies can turn on their makers, and hers had. The fire would come later, but the chains broke that night. December 19th, 1860. The moon hung low and full over Thornhill Estate, turning the red clay silver, turning the live oaks into black skeletons. 50 souls moved in silence. 43 from the quarters, 7 from the big house, walking in a loose line toward the Savannah River, toward Union lines, toward whatever waited beyond Catherine's reach. Jonathan led, pistol tucked in his belt, ledger strapped to his back. Eleanor walked beside him, eyes scanning the dark, listening for dogs, for horses, for Catherine's voice. Abigail held Margaret's hand. Margaret held William's. The younger ones clung to the older girls, silent, wide-eyed. Hope walked at the rear, keeping count, making sure no one lagged. They moved fast, but not panicked. No torches, no lanterns, only moonlight and memory. They had planned this for weeks, mapped the back trails, knew where the river shallows were, knew which plantations to avoid. They knew Catherine would come after them. She always did. Inside the heritage room, Catherine had stopped screaming hours ago. Her wrists bled from struggling against the knotted sheets, her voice hoarse, her rage turned cold and focused. She had found a loose nail in the floorboard, worked it free, began prying at the lock from inside. It was slow, agonizing, but she was patient. She had built an empire on patience. She would not let it fall without a fight. Outside, the group reached the first river crossing at 4 a.m. The Savannah was low this time of year, but cold, knee-deep in places. Jonathan waded in first, testing the current, signaling back. One by one, they crossed, children on shoulders, skirts held high, breath fogging in the night air. No one spoke. Halfway across, Abigail slipped, went under, came up gasping. Jonathan grabbed her, pulled her to the far bank. She coughed, shivered, but kept moving. They were on the other side, wet, freezing, but free of Thornhill soil for the first time. Hope looked back across the water, toward the dark shape of the big house. "She'll come," she said quietly. Jonathan nodded. Let her. They kept moving, deeper into the pine woods, following a trail Hope knew from years of whispered stories. By dawn, they were 6 miles north, hidden in a thicket near an abandoned mill. They rested, shared what little food they'd brought, wrapped the youngest in blankets. Eleanor opened the ledger, tore out the pages with their names, their charts, their futures. She handed them to Jonathan. "Burn them," she said. He built a small fire, fed the pages in, watched them curl and blacken. The flames were small, but bright. When the last page was ash, Eleanor looked at the group. "We're not seedlings anymore," she said. "We're people." A low murmur of agreement rippled through them. Hope spoke next. "We head for the Union camp near Millen. They're taking in runaways. They'll protect us, feed us, help us find kin sold south." They rested 2 hours, then moved again. By noon, they were 12 miles from Thornhill, exhausted, but alive. Back at the estate, Catherine had broken the lock. She staggered out, wrists raw, face streaked with tears and dirt. The house was empty. The nursery beds, stripped. The heritage room, ransacked. The ledger, gone. She ran to the quarters, found them deserted. She screamed, raw, animal. Then she ran to the stable, saddled her fastest horse, rode south, toward Westboro, toward the sheriff, toward anyone who would listen. She found the sheriff in town, burst into his office, disheveled, wild-eyed. "They've taken them," she gasped. "My children, my people, they've run." The sheriff looked at her, calm. "Runaways?" "My children," she insisted. "They're mine, by blood. You have to bring them back." He leaned back in his chair. "War's coming, Mrs. Thornhill. Lincoln's elected. Talk is, the Yankees are freeing slaves. Hard to chase runaways when half the state's about to be under Union boots." Catherine stared at him. "You won't help me?" He shrugged. "I can't, and I won't." She left the office, mounted her horse, rode back toward Thornhill, alone. The house was still empty when she arrived. She walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, the empty beds. She sat in the heritage room, surrounded by broken vials, torn charts, ashes. She picked up a single lock of auburn hair from the floor, held it to the light. Then she laughed, a broken, hollow sound. She had built everything, planned everything, controlled everything, and it walked away. She stood, took the pistol from her pocket, loaded it, placed it against her temple. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the empty fields, scattered birds from the live oaks, and faded into silence. Catherine Thornhill died alone, in the room she had built to preserve her legacy. The legacy was gone. By nightfall, the 50 souls were 20 miles north, camped near a creek, eating cold cornbread, sharing blankets. Jonathan looked at Eleanor. "We did it." Eleanor nodded, tears in her eyes. "We're free," Abigail whispered. "What now?" Hope answered, soft. "Now, we live." They slept under the stars. No chains, no ledger, no mother. And somewhere behind them, Thornhill Estate stood empty, dark, waiting for the war to come and burn what was left. But the children Catherine had made were already walking north, carrying her blood, but no longer carrying her chains. Spring 1861. Thornhill Estate stood empty for months after the escape. Windows dark, doors hanging open, fields unplanted, quarters silent except for wind moving through the live oaks. Catherine's body was found 3 days later, in the heritage room, pistol still in her hand, ledger pages scattered around her like dead leaves. The sheriff came, looked at the scene, shook his head, wrote self-inflicted on the report, buried her in the family plot behind the house. No marker, no eulogy, no one mourned. The war came fast after that. Confederate troops passed through Burke County, requisitioning what little was left. Horses, corn, cloth. They didn't stay long. Union forces swept north later that year, burning plantations, freeing people, leaving ashes. Thornhill burned in the fall of 1862, set ablaze by retreating Confederates who didn't want it falling into Yankee hands. Or perhaps by someone who remembered. The big house collapsed in on itself, timbers cracking, roof falling, flames visible for miles. By morning, only chimneys remained, black fingers pointing at the sky. The land lay fallow for years. Weeds grew tall. Vines claimed the foundation stones. Cypress knees pushed up through the old garden. In 1865, when freedom was official, some of the original 50 returned, not to live, but to look. Hope walked the ruins, stood where the quarters had been, touched the scorched bricks. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Jonathan, now 18, Eleanor 17, Abigail 16, and the others had scattered north, some to Philadelphia, some to New York, some to Canada. They took new names, married, had children, built lives far from red clay and live oaks. They never spoke publicly of Thornhill, but they carried it, in quiet moments, in dreams, in the way they measured their own children's height against doorframes, in the way they taught them to read, to question, to never trust a locked door. Eleanor married in 1872, a carpenter from Savannah, had 3 daughters. She never told them the full story, only fragments. Your grandmother was a hard woman, but we left her behind. Jonathan became a teacher in Boston, taught history, never mentioned his own. He died in 1904. His obituary simply said, "Beloved educator, survivor of the South." Abigail, the bravest, wrote a memoir in 1890, published under a false name, called Shadows on the Clay. It was banned in Georgia, burned in Burke County, but copies survived, passed hand to hand in black communities, read by lamplight. She wrote, "We were born to be owned. We chose to be free. That choice cost everything and nothing." The book ended with one line. The house burned. The chains did not. Thornhill land was sold at auction in 1875, bought by a timber company, cleared, replanted. The old well where some said Catherine's secrets were hidden collapsed, filled with earth, forgotten. By 1900, no one remembered the exact spot, but stories lingered. In Burke County's black churches, in kitchens, in family reunions. Old people told children about the night the big house children walked away, about the woman who thought she could own blood, about the fire that came later, like judgment. They never used Catherine's name. They called her the mistress, or the one who tried to make family out of chains. The children she bore, her real legacy, lived on in descendants who never knew their full story. Some had her green eyes, her auburn hair, her cheekbones. They grew up free, went to school, voted, built businesses, raised families. They carried her blood, but none of her poison. In 1923, a historian found a fragment of Catherine's ledger in a Westboro attic. Pages torn, ink faded. He published a small article, called it Anomalous Plantation Records. No one paid much attention. The world had moved on. But in Burke County, someone remembered. A woman in her 80s, granddaughter of Hope. Read the article. Laughed once, then burned it in her stove. She said to her great-granddaughter, "Let it stay ash. Some things don't need digging up." Thornhill today is just fields, forest, a few foundation stones under kudzu, no marker, no sign. But on certain nights, when the wind moves right across the Savannah River, People who know the old stories say you can hear it. Not screams, not gunshots, just footsteps. 50 sets of footsteps, walking north, fading into the dark, never looking back. Catherine Thornhill tried to build eternity out of blood. She failed. The children she made walked away, carried her name in their veins, but left her name in the ashes, and the land, finally, was quiet. Some legacies burn, and some legacies simply walk away.